Okay, just to also, before we get into this citing research business, there is a survey on the Moodle page. Student Evaluation of Module Survey. So if you'd like to provide some feedback on the module, you can do so. This is an anonymized version. So far, I think 2% of students have provided feedback, which is really low. And you can also provide feedback just directly to me. You can just say, oh, I wish we did this, or I wish we changed that. You can also provide non-anonymized feedback as well. And if there are other questions, feel free to interrupt me at any time. We have to cover this exciting topic of citing research. So, some of the things we're going to talk about today are making use of the material that you find in the literature. So, how do you make use of that literature? We're going to talk about quotes and citations, summaries and citations, citing diagrams, libraries, technology, when you need to provide a citation, how to put a citation in a bibliography, and avoiding plagiarism. Does anybody know already how to cite literature, like when to cite literature and when to cite resources and literature sources? Anybody know already? Do you want to try to explain it? I learned some rules of thumb as a student, as a high school student. There's a very good rule of thumb that I still remember from high school. Does anybody remember any rules of thumb or general sort of guidance? I guess I went to a good high school. Because my high school, I still remember this from high school, my first year of high school, and I don't hear anybody else talking about this. Whenever you use a number, you need to cite the source where you got that number. That's a general rule of thumb. That's not the only time you use citations, but it's a great rule of thumb. And I wish so much that the entire world followed this rule of thumb. I wish everybody in the world went to my high school, learned that rule, because I see so many numbers thrown everywhere by everyone, and they never provide the sources for their numbers, the data, you could call it data. And now that you've attended this lecture, you will start noticing this all the time. Well, you might start noticing this all the time if you pay attention. Yeah. Okay, so why is this important? It's because it's responsible, and it's professional, and it also supports that what you're saying is correct. Right? You want to be correct, or you want to provide evidence for what you're saying too, right? So it's socially and morally responsible to give other people credit for their ideas. If you're presenting an idea from someone else, that is, you want to give them that credit. And you might also need to have something that somebody presents might be protected by intellectual property laws as well. So for preciseness, by giving a direct quotation, we can ensure the original writer's words are not misinterpreted or distorted. Sometimes we take entire sentences and we quote them. Also, by citing where ideas come from, either through direct or indirect quotation, we make the history of a topic clear and who made which arguments. Some people have this idea in their head that citations are bad, right? They think, oh, the more I can write and the less I can cite, the better that is. I would argue that the opposite is true. If you're writing a book or a research paper or anything else, I would say that the more you can cite previous research, the better it is. Does anybody know why? So the more you can cite previous research, I think this indicates two things. It indicates that the author is smart. Like, the more citations I see to previous literature when I read something, the smarter I think that the author is. Because they've done their homework. Like, I think, oh, they know about this? Like, I read research papers all the time, right? And they have a lot of citations in them. And I'm looking at the citations and I'm thinking, oh, they know about that paper and I didn't know about that. I need to go check that out. And so the more I see them citing previous literature, the smarter I think they are, actually. And the more impressed I am with the amount of homework that they've done. So I think that it shows that you've done your homework and your background reading, and it shows that you're smart or you're competent on the subject. Of course, it's possible to abuse and misuse citations, but I'm not talking about that case. Right, another reason is to enable your reader to follow up on a quotation or a summary. If they want to find out more about something you said or look into a topic into more detail, they can do so. And for students, it's to provide evidence of which ideas came from other people and aren't your own. And there's nothing wrong with using other people's ideas. I have this feeling that people think this is this is bad somehow, that they're using someone else's idea is bad. There's nothing bad about using somebody else's idea. Again, it shows you that you've done your homework and it makes you look smarter, right? And if you look around the world, most of the ideas, most of the things that we see are ideas from other people. They're not brand new ideas, right? Okay, it's important to create context for your work, right? It's important to put your work into context of scientific, technical research literature and current technologies. So it's important to show the reader that you know what work has been done already before you. Right? You're working on some project, you want it to be interesting, but in order for it to be interesting and convey that interest, you need to know what's already been done. Right? So that's another important reason for citing your previous work. Context can mean demonstrating that your idea is new, or what is novel about it, or what is interesting, or what is unique. Right? Providing evidence that your approach is promising. Contrasting what you have done with previous work. This is exactly what research is. It's contrasting what you're working on and comparing it with what's been done already. Right? That's exactly what makes research research. And providing the reader with the ability to find out more about what you're doing. You might be explaining where a data set came from, right? And we explain also how to find those papers in the previous lecture. So you already know, given this topic, you already know how to find the papers that are related to that topic. Right? So this slide is very relevant for your dissertation, especially the related work section of your dissertation. So one way we can cite previous work is making a direct quote, right? So you mention exact words in a document. A direct quotation has 4 parts. The quotation itself, the words, not summarized. If you leave out part of a quotation, you can represent the absence of content with these 3 dots. Or if you want to add some notes into a quotation, you use square brackets again. quotation marks around the word cited, the in-text citation directly after the quoted words, so where the quote is from, and then the full reference in the bibliography or the reference list. I think everybody's familiar with that. So these are some examples of direct quotations, right? So there's the quote, there's the quotation marks, there's the citation, and so on. Sometimes longer quotations are put into a block like this. Usually, actually, I would advise you to put quotation marks around the block quotes as well, even though it's clear, but it's still good to put quotation marks there as well. Question?
So if we include some quotation and secondary results, maybe the secondary results have also quoted somewhere. Do you need to put it in the bracket?
That's actually a good question. Did everybody hear his question? Probably not. He said, what if you're quoting a source that's quoting another source, right? It does happen, actually. And I have thought about this. So anybody know the answer already?
Find the original.
That's partially the answer. So my answer is cite both of them. So you can use the one quote and cite both of the previous research papers. Yeah. Again, it makes you look smart, right? So don't be afraid. And in fact, if there aren't enough citations, if I'm reading some research and there aren't enough citations, I start to get suspicious, actually. I can tell you not such an interesting story. I have to review a lot of research papers. Does everybody know what that means? It means when you submit a research paper, it has to go through a process. So it gets distributed to reviewers. Typically, there are maybe 4 reviewers, and the reviewers are anonymized. And the reviewers submit a report about what their opinion is of that research paper. Should it be published? Should it not be published? Should it require any changes or improvements? Are there any errors? Does it seem correct? Are there missing references? That's very common. So whatever their thoughts are, is it new? This is one of the key questions that they have to answer. Is what I'm reading new? Is it correct? So I do a lot of this, right? I do a lot of reviewing. And I was reviewing a paper once, and I was reading it. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, wow, that text looks really familiar. I'm sure I've read that somewhere before. So I'm like, no, it can't be true. So I'm like, okay, I think I'm reading this text, and I think I've seen this before somewhere. But they haven't cited their source, right? So then I'm like, oh gosh, where have I seen that? So I started to look. I just started to try to think, oh, where have I seen this before? And then I'm like, no, wait a sec, I think I remember where I've seen this before. And then I look, it was one of my own papers that I had published. And I'm like, I can't believe it. They have copied and pasted one of my own papers and then submitted it for review. So that doesn't happen very often. That was unfortunate for the people that did that, but it can happen. It's very unusual, though. Anyways, I told them to cite my paper. Do you need to quote directly? So sometimes you might not need to quote directly, right? You can rephrase, right? That's a possible. Or you can summarize. Does anybody know a good rule of thumb for summarizing, it is kind of a pain. It can be a pain, right? You're reading something, you want to summarize it, but you don't want to plagiarize it. You don't want to put the whole thing in quotes because it makes you look lazy. You want a shorter version, but you don't want to plagiarize it either. Anybody know a good rule of thumb?
Read it and take a few minutes and write, speak in your own words.
Say it again, because somebody was...
So read it and then take a rest for maybe 3 minutes and just speak about it.
That's a very good, that's almost exactly what I was going to say, is you can, if you want to summarize a paragraph, for example, read the paragraph, then look away, and then summarize it. Yeah, that will work generally. Very good, very good. So summarize it, but you still include the reference, right? You summarize it, but you still cite what you're summarizing. Yeah. So there are some differences between quote, direct quote, and then a summary, right? Sometimes you do want to quote directly if something you're describing requires very special words. I would say a very common case, though, to quote directly, the most common case I can think of is definitions. When somebody provides a definition, you quote the whole definition. Very, very common.
I have a small question
Yep.
about the position of the mark. Sometimes we put it at the end of the sentence. Sometimes I put it in the center of the sentence. So I want to know the difference between them.
Yes, did everybody hear that? So sometimes the references or the citations go in the middle of the sentence and sometimes at the end. That's a good question. I would say that's a matter of style. So some people, including myself, always put the citation at the end. But some people always put it right after the author names. Yeah. And it's a matter of style. It's not like one is correct and one is incorrect. Usually in this case, you just try to be consistent, like pick a style and stick with it. Yeah. What I've seen is the citations at the end of the sentence are the most common, but I've seen both styles. Yeah.
Now questions as well as direct quotation. So I heard it's not good to use direct quotation when it shows you are lazy. But is that okay for the definition instead it's direct?
Yes, it is. It's fine. It only looks lazy when you're copying like whole paragraphs. There might be some cases where you do want to copy a whole paragraph. If that paragraph is really, really important and you want to like, I don't know, go through it line by line or something, then you might want to quote the whole paragraph. But yeah, don't worry about quoting a sentence, no problem, no problem. Like, go ahead and quote sentences, it's absolutely no problem. Okay, this is a common problem that I see, citing diagrams and images and those sorts of things. So whenever you use a diagram or an image from another source, you want to make sure that you cite where you got that from. I see this trouble all the time. And you'll see that in Bob's Project Guidelines too. It says it in Bob's Project Guidelines. But make sure that you cite the source of wherever you got your image from, right, or your diagram. And if you made it yourself, you mention that in the caption. You say like, I made this, or, you know. But a lot of people, I see this a lot, people using diagrams and images from other sources and not citing the sources. And an academic like myself, we can spot this so easily. It's so easy. We know, okay, this is from another source. Like, we just know from so much practice. If I wasn't sure, if I thought there's an image here and it's from another source, but I couldn't prove it, is there any way I could find out? Anybody know how somebody could find out? Google search has searches for images too, so that's one way. I've used Google image search to identify fake social media profiles. That's a good use for Google image search too. I remember a fake Facebook profile contacting me, and I wrote saying, "Your profile doesn't look real to me. Is that really your picture?" And they said, "Of course it is." And then I put it into Google image search. And I'm like, that's funny because it looks identical to this one. It was some model that they had stolen the image from. Anyways, it's possible to find out about those. You can cite diagrams, software technology, software libraries, right? You can cite, this is how you can cite software libraries. You can find examples of all these as well in Bob's project guidelines. I cite libraries in there, I cite web pages, I cite journal articles, images. You don't need a citation if something is so-called common knowledge. If you're not sure what is common knowledge, then provide a citation, right? But if you were mentioning the Python programming language, you wouldn't need a citation for that. However, in some other audience, you might need a citation for the Python programming language if it was for, you know, an audience of maybe poets or something, and they didn't know what the Python programming language was. You might not need to cite something if you've already cited it and it's clear that the reader knows what you're talking about already. And of course, if it's your own idea, you might not need to cite it. So usually, though, if you have an idea, it's inspired by something. Like, this idea came from the time I was waiting in line and I was using my texting app, and I decided I'm going to make a new app that's like manages wait times or something like that. Okay, and then there's the mechanics of citations, right? Citations are usually a name and a number, right? And then the number points to the reference, and the references are in alphabetical order by first author surname, right, generally speaking. So there's a name, a surname, and then the surname of the first author in a year. Sometimes it's a number, sometimes it's this style. Right. Those are the two most common styles. Does anybody know why this style might be advantageous? This surname and then the year. This can be advantageous because then you don't need to worry about numbers at all, right? If you have 55 citations and then you put in a new one at 56, you don't have to renumber all these other ones, right, if you're doing it manually. Of course, there are tools that will number them automatically for you, right? Does anybody know what tool will number those automatically?
Word. That's the Microsoft Word.
Microsoft Word.
Yeah.
Any other tools?
EndNote. EndNote.
EndNote. Yeah, that's another one. Any others?
Zotero. Zotero.
I don't know that one. Mendeley, yep. I think Mendeley's like, are they still in business, so to speak? I think-
University is free for the students.
Any other ones? BibTech, anybody heard of BibTech? That's another one. Okay, there are lots of styles. I don't really want to talk about that, but just, just notice that when you're looking at research papers, you'll notice there are different styles. Yeah. And this is one style, the Harvard style. That's a good one to use by default, let's say.
APA style.
Yep, APA style is another one. Yes. Yep. So the style is not going to be scored in coursework 3, but the completeness of your references will be scored in coursework 3. So all the information for each reference should be there. So for a conference paper, you have authors, a year, a title, some conference name, the publisher, the pages, the date, the location. The date is optional, location is optional, a DOI. Right, so that's an example.
All the styles has a DOI.
Excuse me?
Not all the styles has a
That's true. Not all the styles include the DOI. You had to say that. The reason I like to use the DOI is just to get you guys to know, make sure you know what a DOI is. But it's also good if you're using sources that have a DOI. If you're using a source that has a DOI, you can be sure, okay, this has been published in a, like, let's say, a reasonable conference or journal. Yeah, if it doesn't have a DOI, then it becomes uncertain. Has this really been published? Like, did this go through a refereeing process or not? Right, but if it has a DOI, you know it's gone through a refereeing process. Like, you could say that's like a quality control check. That's why it's good to have DOIs in there. So you'll notice this is an example. So you might want to look at this, by the way, to help you with coursework 3. And this is a journal paper, right? It has author names, years, title, journal name, volume and issue. Anybody know what volume and issue are? Kind of mysterious, aren't they? Volume and issue. So journals usually publish their papers annually, and that year corresponds to the volume. So if I started a journal in 1970, the year 1970 would be represented by volume 1. So it's like the first year the journal was published. Volume 2 would be the second year the journal was published, and so on. That's the volume. Issue is the time, like it corresponds roughly to the time of the year that it was published. So sometimes a journal will publish multiple times a year, like 4 times a year, quarterly, very common, right? So quarter 1 will be issue number 1. And quarter number 2 will be issue number 2, and so on. Right, so it corresponds roughly to which part of the year. 4 and 6 are probably the most common, like, periodicities, right? Every 3 months or every 2 months, very common. So volume 22, so that means this journal has been around for 22 years, so it started in the year 2000, right? Issue number 1 means it's early on in the year. Yeah, it's the first issue in that year. Okay, you can cite books and book chapters, right? So books have this information. Book chapters have a little bit further, more information. So this is a book example. Books are, the ISBN gives away a book reference. A book chapter has authors. The title of the chapter is here. That's the title of a chapter in the book. And this is the title of the book, actually. And then it has editors and an ISBN number, and then a publisher. And of course the pages. Book chapters are very common to cite. And then URLs or web pages, right? Every page should have a title. Track down the author of that web page. It's going to either be a person or a company, one or the other. Of course, the URL, and then the last access date, last time you looked at it, right? So that web page hasn't been accessed for a long time. And you can keep your references in a database, right, to manage your references. So that I highly recommend using some sort of tool to manage your references and your bibliography. In the coursework 3, you're required to use one. Does anybody remember what it's called? Surveys, right? You're required to use surveys. It's a browser. It's a reference browser. Is probably the right terminology. Right. EndNote is one. BibTeX is another. Right. And there are other ones. Right. So by using citations, you avoid plagiarism, right? We don't work in a vacuum. We learn from other sources, take ideas, algorithms, data sets, text, and so on from other sources. The basic idea is to know, for the reader to know, like, what is the previous work versus what is your work. That's the most important thing we need to see, yeah. So what is plagiarism? Plagiarism is presenting other people's work as your own. By the way, another useless story. I was at the previous university I worked for before Nottingham, I was at an interview. I wasn't the person interviewing. I was at someone else's interview. So at the university level, it's very common when somebody comes to do an interview that they open the interview up to the other staff, so the other staff can come and watch. And as part of the academic interview, it's very common to give a presentation about your research. Say, okay, I'm applying for a job here, I'm some sort of an academic, I do research in the following area, and I'm going to give a presentation about my research, like what research I've done. And hopefully it's interesting to the university. I was watching an interview, somebody giving a presentation, a candidate giving a presentation about research, like to the audience. And as I was watching the presentation, the candidate played a video, right? And I was looking at the video along with everybody else. and like I mentioned before, academics are really, really good at spotting plagiarism. This is like, I don't know, it's just something we get really, really good at over the year with practice. It's some special skill. Anyways, I was watching that video, and as I was looking at it, I'm like, oh, that's not his video, actually. The candidate was using somebody else's video and presenting it as his own, and it was very obvious, actually, and he wasn't citing the person that he got the video from, which was super, super embarrassing, really embarrassing. Don't ever do that, especially at a job interview. But anyways, as an academic, we get really good at spotting these things. Like it's a special skill. So in that interview, that candidate was presenting somebody else's work as if it was his own and hoping that we wouldn't notice. Yeah. But I think everybody noticed. It wasn't just me. Like, when the candidate was gone, I said, everybody knows that was not his video, right? I just wanted to make sure that everybody noticed. But most people said, like, yeah, we can see that. Don't do that. So these are all kind of different ways or methods or instances of plagiarism: submitting someone else's work as your own, copying words, ideas without citations, forgetting quote marks, lying about the source of a quotation, copying and slightly editing someone else's text. We already gave the rule of thumb for that, right? Copying paragraphs or programs from a textbook or web page or anywhere else. Copying another person's work without their knowledge. Working together in groups to produce a single program or essay, then each member of the group submitting a copy of it as their own, right? Without any acknowledgement. And then, of course, paying someone else to do your work for you. And the full, like, detailed guidance is here. And if we look at the University of Nottingham definition, it's presenting another person's work or idea as if it's your own, right? And without the quotations. I still remember I had a research paper that I had to do when I was an undergraduate. And the professor said, just pick any topic you want, do a research paper on that topic, present a point of view, and support it with evidence. And I chose a topic I thought was interesting, and then I submitted it. I got my grade back. Anybody here familiar with the US system of grading? I think it's like the Chinese system. It's like the letter A, B, C, D, E, F. Anybody familiar with that? So A corresponds to 90 to 100, and then B corresponds to 80 to 90, and then C is 70 to 80, and so on. D is 60 to 70. Anyways, I got a B plus, which corresponds to like, upper 80s. And I was like, a B plus, really? I thought I did better than that. And so I went to the teacher and I said, why did I get a B plus? And she said, because you used too many citations. Anyways, not a useful story at all. That won't happen here. That you'll never lose points for too many citations in this module. I do like this analogy. I think this is something everybody can imagine. Imagine you are an engineering student and your final project is to design and build a motorcycle. it is perfectly legal for you to go into a shop and purchase a motorcycle. But then, if you presented that motorcycle that you purchased as your own work, you wouldn't pass, right? You have not provided any evidence of your knowledge of mechanics, materials, electronics, machines, even though that's the aim of the assessment, right? But you can't expect to build it entirely from scratch either, so you make sure you identify what it is that you built and what it is that you didn't build, right? And then you submit that motorcycle. Yeah. I like that analogy. Cutting and pasting, very common, let's say accidental plagiarism, so be aware of that. I think, I talked to one of my colleagues when I was reviewing that research paper, and I found out it was my own words, like I discovered, oh, they used my own words. I called one of my colleagues, my mentor, a mentor, let's say, and I said, like, you'll never believe what happened. I'm reviewing a paper, and they copied and pasted my own words. And my mentor said, yeah, that was a copy-paste error. I bet that was a copy-paste error. They copied your text, they pasted it in, and they forgot to do anything about it, right? So that was his explanation for that. Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up there. Are there any questions, any comments or questions about these topics, citations, and all that sort of stuff? Everybody thinks they know how to cite and reference material.
I have another question. Sometimes you have several sentences that are based on other people's work, but it could be too much words to cite at every sentence. So is that okay just to cite once and everything clear?
Yes, you just cited once, yeah. You can put a comment in there that says, in this section, we're going to discuss the previous work of Bob et al. And make it clear. Or in this paragraph, we're going to talk about this paper. Something like that. Yeah. Any other questions?
In coursework 3, you told us to use a template from coursework 1 to summarise the papers. That obviously includes the title and the authors. Is it fine for that just to be covered by the citation?
Yeah, that part you don't put in the actual text. And if you're not sure, you can just look at some of the surveys. You have examples of surveys that have been published, literature surveys, and see how those papers are summarized. Yeah. Other questions? So a paper summary for the literature review, I would recommend 1 or 2 paragraphs, something like that. Any other questions?
As for the correlated work, do you want us to just put the title of the most related paper, or you want us to summarize what we have, what the work is upon the previous works?
Well, actually, I mean, you don't need to put in the core related work. You could leave that out. So when you're summarizing a paper for a literature review, you don't have to say the core related work for this paper is. What you're doing is you're saying the paper I'm summarizing is the core related work. You know what I mean? Like that paper that you've chose to summarize is itself the core related work on your survey topic. Does that make sense?
But it's like the correlated work is a part of the template.
It's part of the template, that's true. But you can leave that part of the template out. Yeah. Just like the title and the authors, you would not put that in the summary, you'd put that in the references. Yeah.
I'm thinking if you want us to find these papers of the paper we are evaluating.
I mean, usually what I recommend is you have a topic, and once you've chosen a topic, you identify some starting points. Like, where do you start? What's that first paper you start with? Hopefully, the first paper you start with is something that the supervisor, your prospective supervisor, recommended to you, like, here's a paper to start with. And then you can start with that paper and go back to the lecture on how to find related papers and find the most important related papers. You know, using the forward search, it's got Google Site feature, and then the reference section, and then connectedpapers.com. Does that make sense?
Do the 10 papers have to be the most related papers?
You want the 10 papers related to your dissertation that you think are going to help you with your dissertation.
Now, what if I finish and I found some of the papers are more related? Yeah.
You can add them if you want. You're allowed to have more than 10. You don't have to have 10, just 10. Yeah.
Another question. So in the template, we don't need to write the limitation of the paper. But would that be good to write the limitation of the paper in the course list?
It would be good. It would be good. If you have enough space to write the limitations, it would be good. It would be good to have a paragraph at the end of the literature review that sort of summarizes limitations. That would be good. Yeah. Okay, we're out of time. There's some people waiting to come in, so we'll stop here. And then if you have more questions, just ask me after. Hello, Professor.